There is a country on this planet that most people couldn't find on a map. A country with a name that appears in the news only when something terrible happens, and then disappears again, until the next terrible thing. But here is what the news never shows you. This country has cities that are older than Rome. Skyscrapers built entirely from mud that have stood for 500 years. An island so biologically unique that scientists call it the Galapagos of the Indian Ocean. Mountain terraces carved by hand over 3,000 years that produce some of the most prized coffee on Earth. Architecture so intricate, so precise, so breathtaking that UNESCO ran out of words and simply declared the entire old city a World Heritage Site. This country was known for thousands of years by a name that tells you everything you need to know about how the ancient world saw it. Arabia Felix. Happy Arabia. Fortunate Arabia. The land of incense and myrrh and frankincense. The land where trade routes converged and civilizations were born. The land that, for centuries, the rest of the world envied. Today, that same country is the site of what the United Nations has called, repeatedly, the worst humanitarian crisis on the planet. Today, it is a place where a child dies every 10 minutes from preventable causes. Where 21 million people out of a total population of 33 million need humanitarian assistance to survive. Where a war that started nearly a decade ago has never fully stopped and has never fully been explained to the people whose governments helped fund it. This is Yemen. And if you are willing to really look past the headlines and the statistics and the comfortable distance of not knowing, what you are about to see will change the way you understand the world. Stay with me. Before we go any further, if this is the kind of storytelling you came to YouTube for, hit that subscribe button right now. Rome Folios goes deep on the places the world talks about but never actually shows you. This is one of those places. Don't leave before we're done. To understand Yemen, to really understand it, you have to start not with the war, not with the politics, not with the crisis. You have to start with the geography, because geography is destiny. And Yemen's geography shaped everything that came after. Yemen sits at the southwestern tip of the Arabian Peninsula. To its north, Saudi Arabia, one of the wealthiest nations on earth. To its east, Oman. To its west, the Red Sea, one of the most strategically important bodies of water in the world, carrying roughly 10% of global trade. To its south, the Gulf of Aden, the narrow passage between the Arabian Peninsula and the Horn of Africa, through which every ship moving between Asia and Europe must pass. Position on a map is power. And Yemen's position has made it, for thousands of years, either a prize or a target, often both at the same time. The interior of Yemen is not what most people imagine when they think of the Arabian Peninsula. They imagine flat desert, endless sand, the empty vastness of the Rub al-Khali. Yemen is something else entirely. The Haraz Mountains in the west rise to over 3,000 meters. Their slopes terraced by hand over millennia into some of the most extraordinary agricultural landscapes on Earth. The Hadramaut Plateau in the east is a world of deep, sheer-walled valleys carved through limestone, where ancient cities cling to the cliff sides and the light at sunset turns everything the color of old honey. The coastal plain along the Red Sea, the Tahama, is a different country entirely, flat and tropical and humid, with African influences in its music, its food, its architecture. And then there is the interior, the vast, hot, and dry eastern regions where the ancient incense trade routes ran, where the ruins of civilizations that flourished before the birth of Christ still stand in the desert, barely excavated, barely studied, barely known. Yemen is not one landscape. It is 10 landscapes compressed into a country the size of France. And before the war, before all of it, it was one of the most visually extraordinary places in the world. The history of Yemen is older than almost anything you have been taught. The kingdom of Saba, the Sabians, built one of the great ancient civilizations here, beginning around 1000 BC. You may know their queen by her biblical name, the Queen of Sheba. She appears in the Hebrew Bible, in the Quran, in Ethiopian tradition. She is said to have traveled to meet King Solomon, carrying gifts of gold and spices and intelligence. Whether you take that story literally or not, the civilization behind it was absolutely real. The Sabaeans built the Marib Dam, one of the greatest engineering achievements of the ancient world. A structure that irrigated an entire region, supported a population of hundreds of thousands, and functioned for over 1,000 years before finally breaking in the 6th century AD. The ruins of that dam still stand in the Yemeni desert. Or they did, until recently. The Sabaeans also controlled the incense trade. In the ancient world, frankincense and myrrh were not luxury goods. They were essential for religious ritual, for medicine, for embalming, for the simple, daily fact that in a world without modern sanitation, burning incense made life bearable in ways that went beyond the ceremonial. The entire ancient economy of the Arabian Peninsula moved on the backs of camels, carrying incense north to Egypt, to Rome, to the courts of the Mediterranean world. And those trade routes passed through Yemen. Every caravan, every merchant, every coin that changed hands, all of it flowed through this land. That is why they called it Arabia Felix. Not because it was easy, but because it was rich. After the Sabaeans, the Himyarites, then a brief Ethiopian occupation, then the Persians, then Islam, arriving in the 7th century and transforming the entire cultural foundation of the region. Yemen became part of the Islamic world and then, gradually, partially, imperfectly, part of the Ottoman Empire. Then British controlled in the south, nominally independent in the north. Then 2 separate countries, North Yemen and South Yemen, divided by Cold War politics in the same way Korea and Germany were divided, socialist, south, conservative, north. Then, in 1990, reunification, a single Yemeni republic. A moment of genuine hope, followed almost immediately by the familiar cycle of power struggles, regional grievances, economic collapse, and the slow accumulation of conditions that, by 2014, would tip the entire country into the abyss. But before we go there, before we talk about the war, we need to spend time with what was here, what is still here, in some places, if you know where to look. Because if you don't understand what was lost and what is still being lost, the statistics mean nothing. They are just numbers. Sanaa, the capital of Yemen, one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities on Earth. There are human settlements here that date back to before recorded history. There is a legend among the Yemeni people that Shem, the son of Noah, the one who survived the flood, built this city on the plateau where his father's ark came to rest. The geology of the plateau makes the legend feel almost plausible. The old city of Sanaa, the part that existed before the modern world arrived, is a place unlike anything you have seen. Not even in the rest of the Arab world. Not even in the rest of the Islamic world. The tower houses of the old city, some of them 8, 9, 10 stories tall, are built entirely from stone and fired mud, brick, their facades decorated with geometric patterns in white gypsum that catch the light at different hours of the day and seem almost to glow. The windows, the famous Kamaria of Sanaa, are made from alabaster and colored glass, fitted into intricate geometric frames. At night, when the lights inside are on and the colored glass panels cast patterns of red and green and gold onto the narrow alleyways below, the old city of Sanaa looks like something from a story told before cities had electric light. Like something that was designed from the beginning to be beautiful. Not impressive, not monumental. Beautiful. At human scale, intricate, alive. The Great Mosque of Sanaa is one of the earliest mosques in Islamic history, built, according to tradition, during the lifetime of the Prophet himself. The souks of the old city sell everything that the souks of this region have always sold. Silver jewelry, cot leaves, dried fruits, spices, incense, textiles woven in patterns that have not changed in centuries. The smell is specific and unrepeatable. Dust and incense and coffee and the particular sweetness of cot leaves drying in the shade. UNESCO declared the old city of Sanaa a World Heritage Site in 1986. In 2015, as the bombs began to fall, UNESCO issued an emergency appeal for the protection of Sanaa's cultural heritage. The appeal was largely ignored. Several historic buildings were damaged or destroyed. The old city survives partially, precariously, with the particular vulnerability of a place that was never built to withstand high explosives. Leave Sanaa, drive east, into the Hadramaut, and the landscape does something unexpected. It opens, the mountains fall away behind you. The plateau stretches to every horizon in shades of brown and gold and deep red, cut by the occasional deep canyon where a wadi has carved its way through the limestone over millions of years. And then, at the bottom of one of those canyons rising from the valley floor, like something that cannot possibly be real, Shibam. 500 towers of mud brick, rising between 5 and 9 stories from the flat valley floor, packed together within a defensive wall, their facades smooth and vertical and ancient. The Manhattan of the desert. Western visitors called it when they first saw it in the 20th century. That comparison is inadequate. Manhattan is young. Manhattan is glass and steel, designed for efficiency, built to be replaced. Shibam is 400 years old at its youngest, parts of it over 2,000 years old, and it was built not for efficiency but for survival. In a region where Bedouin raids were a constant threat, height was protection. The higher your tower, the safer your family. The narrow streets between the towers, wide enough for 2 people to pass, no more were designed to slow attackers, to funnel them into places where defenders had the advantage. The entire city is a fortification that also happens to be, objectively, one of the most extraordinary examples of vernacular architecture in the history of human civilization. It is made from mud. Mud that has to be replastered regularly, mud that is vulnerable to the heavy rains that occasionally fall in the Hadramaut, mud that requires constant maintenance and communal effort to preserve, and yet it stands. It has been standing for centuries. While empires rose and fell around it, while the world below forgot about it and rediscovered it and forgot again, Shibam stood. The people of the Hadramaut have a diaspora that is famous throughout the Arab world and beyond. For centuries, Hadrami merchants and sailors spread across the Indian Ocean to East Africa to India, to Southeast Asia, to Indonesia, where Hadrami communities still exist today and still maintain connections to this valley. The remittances they sent home built mosques and palaces in the Hadramaut that seem impossible given the remoteness of the location. Palaces of white plaster with elaborate decorations, standing in the middle of a desert valley, built by men who made their fortunes on the other side of the world and came back to spend them here, because home meant something, because belonging to a place meant something. That is the Hadrami way. And then Socotra, an island in the Arabian Sea, 240 kilometers from the Yemeni coast and 240 kilometers from Somalia. Remote, isolated, so isolated that it evolved over millions of years of biological separation into something that does not resemble the rest of the world. 37% of Socotra's plant species exist nowhere else on Earth. 90% of its reptile species. 95% of its land snail species. Numbers that, when you look at them, suggest not an island but a separate planet. The most famous of Socotra species is the Dracaena cinnamomum, the dragon blood tree, named for the dark red resin that bleeds from its bark when cut. Shaped, and this is not a metaphor, this is genuinely what they look like. Shaped like an umbrella designed by someone who had only heard umbrellas described but never actually seen one. A thick trunk rising to a dense, flat canopy of upturned branches, hundreds of them, on the high plateau of the island, standing in the fog that collects around the peaks in summer, looking like nothing that belongs in this world. The light on Socotra is different. The beaches are deserted, white sand and turquoise water, and the particular silence of a place that receives very few visitors under the best of circumstances and almost none now. The people of Socotra speak their own language, Socotri, a South Semitic language unrelated to Arabic, unwritten until recently, preserved orally for thousands of years. They are among the most isolated human communities on Earth, and they are now, along with everything else on this island, at risk. The war in mainland Yemen brought military forces to Socotra. The UAE, a member of the Saudi-led coalition, moved troops onto the island in 2018, a move that Yemen's internationally recognized government protested and that raised serious questions about the island's long-term sovereignty. The dragon blood trees don't know about any of that. They stand on their plateau, as they have stood for millions of years, in their impossible shapes, against their impossible sky. But the humans who share the island with them are caught, like all Yemenis, in forces far larger than themselves. We have to talk about the war. There is no way to tell the story of Yemen honestly without talking about the war. But I want to be careful here, because the war in Yemen is genuinely complicated, not in the way that word is sometimes used to avoid taking positions, but in the real sense. It is a conflict with roots that go back decades, with actors whose motives are multiple and contradictory, with a cast of external players whose involvement has been as destructive as anything happening on the ground. The short version is this. In 2011, during the Arab Spring, Yemen's longtime president Ali Abdullah Saleh, who had ruled for 33 years, mostly through a careful balance of bribery, manipulation, and selective violence, was forced to step down. His replacement, Abdrabbu Mansur Hadi, inherited a country that was already fracturing. In the north, a rebel movement known as the Houthis, formerly Ansar Allah, A Zaidi Shia political and military organization had been fighting the central government intermittently since 2004. In 2014, the Houthis moved south. They took Sanaa. Then they kept moving. In March 2015, Saudi Arabia, alarmed by what it saw as an Iranian proxy force on its southern border, launched a military intervention. A coalition of Arab states, supported by the United States and the United Kingdom with intelligence, logistics, refueling, and weapons, began bombing Yemen. The stated goal was to restore the internationally recognized government and push the Houthis back. 9 years later, the Houthis control most of the north, including Sanaa. The internationally recognized government controls parts of the south, weakly and disputedly. The war has killed over 377,000 people. The majority of those deaths, more than 2/3, were not from direct violence. They were from disease, from hunger, from a healthcare system that has been systematically destroyed, from the entirely preventable consequences of a country being torn apart while the rest of the world watched. The bombing campaign conducted by the Saudi-led coalition has been extensively documented by human rights organizations, by journalists, by UN investigators. The findings are consistent. Repeated strikes on civilian infrastructure, hospitals, schools, markets. A wedding party in 2015, 131 people killed. A school bus in 2018, 40 children on a field trip, dead. A funeral hall in 2016, 140 mourners, dead. In each case, the ordinance was American-made. In some cases, it was sold to Saudi Arabia under contracts signed within months of the strikes. The Houthis have also committed documented atrocities: sieges of civilian areas, forced disappearances, recruitment of child soldiers, the use of landmines, obstruction of humanitarian aid. This is not a war with good guys and bad guys in the simple sense. It is a war in which ordinary Yemeni civilians are paying with their lives and their futures for decisions made by governments and movements that have never been accountable to them. The port of Hodeidah on Yemen's Red Sea coast handles approximately 70% of the country's food and humanitarian imports. In 2018, coalition forces launched a major offensive to take the port from Houthi control. The UN warned that the battle could trigger a famine of catastrophic proportions. The battle happened anyway. A ceasefire was eventually negotiated. The port changed hands and changed hands again. And through all of it, the ships waited. Food, medicine, fuel, sitting in the harbor, cleared by international donors, unable to unload because the port facilities were damaged, and the clearance procedures were used as weapons of war. In 2020, the UN estimated that 80% of Yemen's population, 24 million people, were living in poverty. That is not a statistic from a distant past. That is ongoing. That is the reality of 24 million human lives right now as you watch this. If you're still watching, and I hope you are, because what comes next matters, subscribe to Rome Folios right now. We are one of the very few channels on YouTube that goes to places like this and tells the full story. Not just the beautiful parts, not just the terrible parts, all of it. Subscribe so you don't miss what we do next. But here is what the statistics cannot tell you. Here is what the numbers, the 300,000 dead, the 21 million in need, the 40 children on that school bus cannot fully convey. The people, the specific, irreducible, extraordinary people of Yemen, who were here before this war, who will be here after it, who are here now, living lives of extraordinary dignity inside circumstances that most of us cannot begin to imagine. A woman named Fatima runs a small bakery in a neighborhood of Sanaa that has not been directly bombed. Every morning, she is up before dawn. She mixes the dough by hand because the electricity is too unreliable to depend on a mixer. She fires the clay oven with wood she has to source carefully because fuel is scarce and expensive. She makes the bread that her customers who have been coming every morning for years, who know her by name, whose children she has watched grow up, need to start their day. The bread costs more now than it did before the war. Everything costs more. But she is there every morning because life continues, even here, because there is dignity in the act of doing your work. In the old city of Sanaa, an elderly scholar named Ahmed spends his days in a library of hand-copied manuscripts. Some of them are 800 years old, works of theology, of astronomy, of medicine, of poetry. He has been cataloging them carefully with a patience that the circumstances of his country make almost incomprehensible to an outsider. When asked why, when the building might be damaged, when the power goes out, when the city around him has been transformed by conflict, he says something that doesn't translate perfectly but means approximately, these books have survived 1,000 years. They will survive this too. On the coast of the Red Sea, a fisherman named Mohammed goes out every morning in his small wooden boat. The sea has been partially closed to fishing boats at various points in the conflict when naval forces Houthi or coalition deem the waters too dangerous or too strategic for civilian traffic. On the days when he can fish, he fishes. On the days when he cannot, he waits. He has children to feed. He has a boat that belonged to his father and to his father's father. He is not a statistic. He is not a victim narrative. He is a fisherman, doing what fishermen do, waiting for the sea to be his again. In a school in Aden, partly destroyed, its roof open to the sky in the corner where a shell hit in 2016, children sit in rows and learn to read. The teacher is a woman in her 30s who trained as a teacher before the war and has continued teaching through it for years, for a salary that is either delayed or not paid at all, because the state that was supposed to pay her has fragmented into competing authorities, none of which fully functions. She teaches because the children need to learn. She teaches because if she stops, who else will? She teaches because education is the only investment that no one can bomb out of a child once it has been made. The children sit in their rows, they learn to read, and outside the open wall of the damaged classroom, the city goes on. Now we need to turn the camera around, because this story is not only about Yemen, it is, in part, about us, about the countries that supply the weapons, about the governments that sign the contracts, about the choices that were made in the name of strategic interest that made what happened to Yemen possible. The United States has been the single largest supplier of weapons to Saudi Arabia. In 2017 alone, the Trump administration approved a $110 billion arms deal, the largest in American history. The weapons included, and this is documented, this is not speculation, the exact types of bombs later found in the wreckage of Yemeni civilian sites. GBU 31 JDAM guidance kits, Mk-84 bombs, laser-guided paveway bombs, American-designed, American-manufactured, delivered to Saudi Arabia, used in Yemen. After the school bus strike in 2018, when 40 children died, the Associated Press traced the bomb fragment found at the site to a Lockheed Martin-produced weapon sold to Saudi Arabia under a US government contract. The UK has faced similar scrutiny over its arms sales. In 2021, the UK Court of Appeal ruled that the British government had acted unlawfully in approving arms exports to Saudi Arabia without adequately assessing the risk of civilian casualties. The Biden administration suspended some weapons sales in 2021, citing concerns about civilian harm, then resumed them, then suspended the delivery of offensive weapons specifically while continuing other military support. The distinctions are real, but they are fine. And 21 million people living in humanitarian crisis do not experience fine distinctions. In 2019, the US Senate passed a resolution invoking the War Powers Act to end American military support for the Saudi-led coalition's operations in Yemen. The resolution passed both chambers. President Trump vetoed it. This is a fact, not a political opinion, a fact. In 2021, the US Senate passed a bipartisan resolution blocking arms sales to Saudi Arabia. It did not become law. There are people watching this video who pay taxes to a government that has been involved in this conflict for nearly a decade. That is not said to produce guilt. Guilt is not useful. It is said because the gap between what most Americans know about Yemen, which is very little, and what their government has done in Yemen, which is documented, is itself a kind of story. A story about attention, about what we choose to see and what we choose not to, about who counts as a person whose suffering matters enough to know about. Yemen will not always be at war. I know that sounds like an act of faith. It is an act of faith, but it is also simply historically true. Wars end. They end badly, often. They end incompletely. They leave wounds that take generations to heal, but they end. And when this one ends, whenever that is, however that happens, what will be left? The old city of Sanaa, damaged but standing. The towers of Shibam, still rising from the valley floor. The dragonblood trees of Socotra, still growing on their plateau, still bleeding red when you cut their bark, still standing in their impossible shapes against their impossible sky. The manuscripts in Ahmed's library. The bread that Fatima will make the morning after the last bomb falls, just as she made it the morning of the first. The children in the damaged classroom in Aden who learned to read in the years the war was happening, and who will carry that knowledge that was what no one could take from them into whatever comes next. Yemen will not always be at war, but it will always be Yemen, ancient, complex, beautiful in ways that the world, distracted by its own noise, never fully saw. And that maybe is the only thing this video can offer that the news never does. Not solutions, not politics, not the false comfort of a story that ends with things resolved. Just the act of looking, really looking, at a place that exists, at people who matter, at a history too long and too rich to be reduced to a crisis, at a country whose full name is the Republic of Yemen, but whose ancient name is still truer, Arabia Felix, Fortunate Arabia, Happy Arabia, the name it had when the world still knew what it held. The old city of Sanaa is still there. The minarets rise above it at sunset, catching the last light in golden shadow, the same way they have caught it for 1,000 years. The Camarilla windows glow. The call to prayer moves through the alleyways. And somewhere in the city, someone is making coffee from beans grown on the mountain terraces above Haraz, the same terraces, planted on the same slopes, harvested in the same way as they have been for 500 years. The coffee is extraordinary, the oldest in the world. This is where it comes from. Remember that. Remember all of this, because the worst thing that happens to a place like Yemen is not the bombs. It is being forgotten. If this video gave you something, share it. Send it to someone who doesn't know this story. That is the only thing I am asking. Subscribe to Rome Folios if you want to keep seeing the world this way, really seeing it. And leave a comment. Tell me what you knew about Yemen before today. Tell me what changed. Because some stories only matter if someone is listening. I'll see you in the next one.